What's up, gentlemen? So I've got a question for you. When you think of an alpha male, what comes to mind? Somebody who's big, somebody who's strong, somebody who walks in the room and has presence, somebody who's 6'3", 250 pounds of twisted steel and sex appeal. And that's probably what you think of and associate with being an alpha male. But a few years ago, I sort of decided to challenge that notion.
This video is going to talk about the way the term alpha male is used in today's self-help and pop culture genres. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and unfortunately plenty of people willing to take advantage of insecure men by telling them that if they just sign up for the right course or buy certain hair products, they'll start taking calls at a mahogany desk in the corner office and getting laid 5 times a week. We're going to set the record straight. We're going to take a hard look at evolutionary biology and psychology in order to better understand what makes a man an alpha in the eyes of other men, women, and himself. We're going to encounter some harsh truths about reality, and it's going to be uncomfortable. But I hope you'll make it to the end, because I've also got some good advice for those of you who found this video while searching for solutions to social and existential problems. First, let's get an idea of what I'm arguing against.
Because honestly, I feel like the modern day alpha male requires a different skill set than in the old days, like when you were like fighting and had to go into battle or wrestling lions and fighting and jousting and stuff like that, right? You needed to be big and strong, and these are the dudes that dominated. But in today's world, I sort of think, and I have a theory, that the modern day alpha male needs to possess a different set of skills. The beautiful thing is that these skills can be developed.
First of all, the idea that skill development has a causal link with improved social status is valid. I'm certainly not here to tell you that you shouldn't develop new skills. But the idea that there are specific skills you can learn which will turn you into an alpha male is completely absurd. It ignores, and in this case flat out denies, a few of the most significant biological factors in determining alpha status, namely size, strength, and low cortisol stress response, or the ability to keep cool under pressure. It demonstrates an obvious misunderstanding of what the term is used to describe and turns it into something like a personal philosophy or lifestyle choice, which further cheapens its value as a descriptive term. It leaves out the fact that alpha male status is achieved not only through confrontation with other would-be alphas, but also through selection by the group to which the alpha status applies. Ultimately, this game we're playing amongst men to determine who gets to lead the pack is an evolutionary tool to propagate a species. It's a method of selection for stronger genes which is manifested through male competition for territory and mating rights, and it not only discriminates against anything that is disadvantageous to the environment, it's absolutely ruthless in the process. Human social structures are so varied and complex that in some situations this game no longer seems to apply, and we'll get to that. But we've got to take things in order. So we're going to start with biology and work our way through psychology and sociology until we reach a better understanding of the term alpha male and what it describes in modern human beings.
In the ape world, it's easy to spot an alpha. They're really big. Alpha gorillas are the only adult males in their troop, and twice the size of the females. Alpha chimps aren't always the largest in their group, but they make up for it by puffing themselves up to look the biggest.
Now, obviously human beings are more complex than gorillas and chimps. Gorillas can seldom recognize themselves in the mirror, let alone maneuver the type of social landscape humans construct. But biology builds up, not down, and the same circuits used by chimps and gorillas to determine and recognize social status were evolved in a common ancestor. Some go as far back as lobsters. So of course it's not so simple as the largest or most aggressive male reliably achieving alpha status in human societies, but we do use much of the same circuitry as chimps and gorillas, and size is the most salient feature recognized by this circuitry. Casual confrontations between human males still maintain a real underlying threat of violence, and size reliably determines who would win those contests. It also plays a psychological role, without stepping on the toes of part 2, as larger men are more likely to be confident in their ability to defend what they claim, and therefore more likely to stake claims in the first place. Obviously, size can be influenced through building muscle mass, but for the most part it's a fixed variable, and not a developed skill. But I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the fact that today, sheer size can have a negative impact on social status as well, especially when unaccompanied by other alpha traits.
Cause I'm no fitness coach, but those tits are gross. I've got some tips and notes to help you get ripped and toned. You need to ditch the toast and switch to oats. You need to leave the chips alone and stop looking for a pig to roast. You need to give the gym a go if you wish to slow your nipple growth.
National Geographic ran a little study on the way men respond differently to size, which confirms, as if this really needed to be studied, that size still matters in at least some human social interactions. They sent 2 guys, one little and one big, into a bar with cameras planted and recorded what happened when they tried to steal the beers of other men.
Let's rewind and find out what happened to the little guy in ape terms.
That was an absolutely immediate reaction. The victim gives him a direct stare, which in the primate world is a definite threat.
But how did the drinkers react when the bigger beer bandit went in?
As soon as he saw how big the guy was, he wasn't prepared to challenge him. The way he's turned and he's put his palm up, that is an absolutely classic gesture in chimps to try and solicit support. You can see, even before anything's happened, the little guy at the bar has moved out of the way. It's as if he's sensed this big guy coming up behind him. The victim glances at, confirms just how enormous he is, and then does a very, very abrupt head movement as he averts his gaze and puts his head down. Again, that's something that you would see right across the primates, kind of submissive behavior.
So we understand the obvious influence size has in determining alpha status. But what happens when 2 dominant personality types of the same size collide? Other biological factors come into play. Now this video gets pretty boring pretty quick if I start talking about the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, so I'm going to keep it relatively simple for the sake of entertainment. But feel free to pause the video and read this article. It'd probably be good for you. Long story short, hormones such as adrenaline and cortisol work in combination to respond to stressful situations, regulate the nervous system, and maintain homeostasis throughout the body. In high-level combat sports where weight classes are implemented and skill sets are relatively even, the power of these natural aptitudes to sometimes influence the outcome of competition is pronounced. World-class counterpunchers such as Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather are said to be able to detect the stress response in facial expressions and body language of opponents, and even induce a cortisol dump through taunting and provocation, thereby reducing their opponent's ability to disguise intent and gaining the ability to predict shots before they're even thrown. Their own low cortisol response to stress allows them to focus under pressure and deliver that devastating counter they're known for. We can see this plainly enough in the study of martial arts. When your opponent is hurrying recklessly, you must act contrarily and keep calm. You must not be influenced by the opponent. Miyamoto Musashi. Research from 2010 at the University of Texas showed that the relationship between testosterone and cortisol is antagonistic, and cortisol dumps tend to evoke the flight response rather than the fight response by inhibiting the behavioral effects of testosterone. It showed that males who lost in a one-on-one competition were more likely to compete again if they had high levels of testosterone and low cortisol, and males even with high testosterone but high cortisol were more likely to quit after defeat. This has a plethora of implications for how we respond to stress and dominate social situations, probably most important of which is the confidence associated with low cortisol levels. So, males with physical attributes such as size and strength, along with high testosterone production and low cortisol stress responses, are biologically predisposed to dominate human social hierarchies. They know it, everybody around them knows it, and that's why it seems to happen so naturally for them, because it is natural. Size, strength, and favorable hormone production aren't completely fixed variables, but these aptitudes relate directly to human social interactions, behavior, and hierarchies. And here's the first harsh truth which we're gonna just rip off like a band-aid. If you're 5'5" and found this video by googling how to be an alpha male, chances are you're not an alpha and never will be. You're not going to improve your social status by pretending to be something you're not. Do you think Conor McGregor took a class to learn how to posture himself or hold eye contact with women or shake a man's hand? He may have worked relentlessly to learn how to fight, but nobody taught him to want to fight in the first place. Natural alphas are predisposed to dominate social environments and don't need to learn how to do it on YouTube. Pseudo-alphas come across as hyper-aggressive, forced, and unstable, only seeming tyrannical when in control. They may dominate some group of weak individuals for a short time, but if they become too domineering over their subordinates, they will be rejected by the tribe, or a true alpha will come along and put them in their place without breaking a sweat. A natural alpha doesn't need to be a tyrant. He became an alpha because of his predisposition to confront chaos and maintain order within his group, and the group respects him for that. If you don't naturally welcome confrontation or find yourself falling into leadership roles, don't force it, and this leads us into part 2.
The pseudo-alpha male has an exaggerated sense of masculinity that is a cover for an underlying insecurity regarding their self-worth and lovability.
My bad, forgot to put a trigger warning there. I guess that's harsh truth number 2. It's hard to pin down the psychology of the alpha because the term really only describes a position within a hierarchy and not a personality type. What we can do is look at the different personality traits common among those in top positions and recognize patterns. Among what contemporary personality psychologists commonly refer to as the Big 5 personality traits are extroversion, agreeableness, openness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism. What's important for this video is to determine which traits are associated with alpha males and also find out to what degree these traits can be trained or developed. Along with the Big 5 traits, we're also going to take a look at IQ. It's well established within the psychological literature that high conscientiousness correlates with career success more strongly than any other trait. It manifests in 3 related facets: achievement orientation, dependability, and orderliness. People who are conscientious are said to be hardworking and persistent, responsible and dependable, planful and organized. These all seem like the basics for somebody you'd want to have in charge. Extroversion correlates with social success, as we all know, and people who are extroverted are more sociable, active, and impulsive, and less dysphoric, introspective, and self-preoccupied than people who are introverted. Thus, they're described as outgoing, gregarious, dominant, ambitious, adventurous, and assertive. These are qualities which would be as helpful today in dominating social settings as size would have been 50,000 years ago. Next up is neuroticism, which refers generally to a lack of positive psychological adjustment and emotional stability. People who are high in neuroticism are prone to stress, anxiety, hostility, depression, self-consciousness, and vulnerability. Men high in neuroticism are very likely to become pseudo-alpha males as a defense mechanism, but as we've already seen, many of these qualities are the opposite of what an alpha needs, so we can count low neuroticism toward our definition. Openness and agreeableness are pretty self-explanatory, and we want to be right around the center of both spectrums in order to maximize tendencies for cooperation without hindering the drive to compete. A man too high in agreeableness won't be dominating any groups, and a man too low in agreeableness won't be leading any. Likewise, a man too high in openness won't be defending and maintaining order, and a man too low in openness won't be able to adapt with change. So our template for the personality of a modern alpha looks like this: high conscientiousness, high extroversion, low neuroticism, average agreeableness, and average openness. Of course, as with biology, these aren't entirely fixed variables, but they do seem to have some solid predictive power for social and career success. Further, they all work in conjunction to produce a man who is confident, persistent, sociable, competitive yet cooperative, and ultimately charismatic, which is a big part of what being an alpha means for human beings. As with many topics in psychology, there are a number of different ways to conceptualize and quantify personality stability. You can test a large group of people and make inferences based on the patterns which develop around age, or you can do a longitudinal study of a small group or individual across time to observe the stability in their personality traits. So how fixed are these personality traits? How much skill development and training does it take to make one more extroverted or conscientious? According to the maturity principle of adult personality development, personality traits are susceptible to gradual and predictable change over time. The cumulative continuity principle of personality development says that many traits become more stable as one matures. So the basic takeaway from this is that people tend to go through developmental stages around the teenage and young adult years before settling into their fully developed personalities. Many of the mechanisms associated with personality stability and development are understood through person-environment interplay, which basically just means that certain people tend to select, attract, manipulate, and transform certain environments based on their personality attributes, and vice versa. If you want to significantly change who you are, you may be able to do that by drastically changing your environment to one that's uncomfortable for you, perhaps by joining the military if you want to produce orderliness, for example. The extent to which personality traits can be intentionally influenced was always assumed to be very low, but there is active research into methods of psychotherapy which might be effective at producing significant and lasting change. Cognitive behavioral therapy, assertiveness training, confidence and self-esteem development. These have shown promising signs for lowering neuroticism and increasing extroversion, but much more research is needed to determine if these therapies really produce lasting changes in those personality traits or merely short-term changes in attitude and mood. This is known as the trait versus state question. Regardless, I didn't see any of these alpha male videos suggesting psychotherapy or joining the military. Not to mention the fact that you'll need a very specific set of therapies and environment exposure to adjust your personality just right to be perfectly in tune with that of the natural alpha. And there's very little evidence that perhaps the most important trait, conscientiousness, can be intentionally altered with any significance. Developmental psychology is the field associated with determining how, when, and why all these traits are developed in the first place, and it sheds a lot of light on the reasons that men who are biologically gifted with alpha traits may become neurotic and introverted, and thereby display classic signs of the pseudo-alpha. Such reasons include, but are certainly not limited to, the absence of a proper masculine father figure, lack of order and discipline, cultural influences, and abuse. Since these two traits, neuroticism and introversion, are the most promising candidates for alteration through psychotherapy, it might be possible for pseudo-alphas to be reconciled with their true nature. But that doesn't mean that just anybody who improves their Big Five distribution is going to be able to fill the boots of the natural alpha. You can increase your confidence and extroversion all you want. It's still going to be hard to get people to see you as a leader if you don't look and sound the part. And now we get to talk about IQ.
What's really happened, as far as I can tell so far, is that when we're trying to predict people's course through life, IQ does a very good job, and then one of the traits does a very good job as well, which is conscientiousness. But it doesn't do as good a job as IQ. Now that partly might be because we can't measure conscientiousness very well. We're stuck with self-reports, or maybe I could gather peer reports about you, or I could gather your parents' reports about you, or teachers' reports, and each of those seems to pick up a little bit more of the pattern, because you know yourself, but other people know you differently than you know yourself, and there's still some accuracy in that. You can get multiple rater reports of something like conscientiousness, and that'll up its predictive validity. But in the final analysis, the best you seem to be able to do with conscientiousness is about a 0.4 correlation with long-term performance, whereas with IQ, in complex jobs, you can probably get 0.5 and maybe 0.6. And so 0.5 is 25% of the variance. You got to square it. 0.6 is 36% of the variance, and 0.4 is 16% of the variance. So even at the low end, let's say high end for conscientiousness is 0.4 or 16%. Low end for IQ is 0.5 or 25%. Low end estimates of IQ make it 1.5 times more powerful than the high end estimates of conscientiousness. And I think that's about right. You'd think, why do we even have to debate this? And because it's so bloody obvious to me that intelligence is a major predictor of life success. I mean, you people, I've measured the IQ of University of Toronto people. You know, people in this room who have an IQ of less than 120 are rare. Well, why? Well, smart people go to university. Now, is that actually a contentious statement?
Now, if you're one of these people who doesn't believe in the validity of IQ science, I don't know what you're still doing here, and I don't have time to explain that shit to you. It's more valid and well established than everything else we've covered in this section so far. I also don't want to spend an hour talking about the various methods of measuring IQ and distinctions between spatial and verbal and emotional, etc. It's a real can of worms. I just want to touch on the fact that IQ is the most powerful predictor for financial success in today's Western economy, but it wasn't always that way, and it's not that way everywhere. For the vast majority of recorded history, there's been very low maneuverability between classes and even less opportunity to achieve the highest positions in society. A high IQ does little for a farmer in North Korea because he's always just going to be a farmer in North Korea, as it was in the West until quite recently. Still, within their own lower social class hierarchies, higher IQ and general alpha traits are beneficial in achieving higher status. Further, verbal communication is incredibly important to human beings, and a high verbal IQ grants a person respect and confidence, which can't be ignored. If all else is equal in terms of size, strength, and personality between two individuals, surely the one with the higher IQ will assume the leadership role in most situations. So, how does one go about increasing their IQ? Well, it depends whether we're talking about fluid or crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence refers to the ability to solve new problems, use logic, and identify patterns. Crystallized intelligence is the ability to use learned knowledge and experience. Essentially, fluid IQ measures how well your brain works, while crystallized IQ measures how much you know. The Flynn effect shows that both have been increasing globally at a sustained rate for nearly 100 years, and there's plenty of debate about why that's happening, but there's very little evidence to suggest that an individual can do much to intentionally increase their own fluid IQ. We all remember Luminosity, the brain training game. It and other games like it began catching lawsuits for false advertising because they intentionally misconstrued the principle of neuroplasticity in order to convince people that their games could help improve cognitive function. Many psychologists signed on to dispute the claims made about these games because the science simply doesn't suggest that fluid IQ can be increased in any significant way. Crystallized IQ is another story, so again we've got what seems like a silver lining. However, methods for increasing crystallized IQ involve some highly introverted, open, and agreeable behaviors, such as long hours reading and learning from others, or removing yourself from social settings entirely in order to become reflective and introspective. This may help you develop wisdom and become a good mentor/advisor, but the more quick on your feet, logical, problem-solving characteristics of fluid IQ will help you dominate others and assume a leadership role. Before we move on to sociology and our conclusion, I want to end this section by tying it into the first section to discuss body language, because I feel that's the best of many intersections between biology and psychology in terms of demonstrating my point. I'm gonna assume we all know the basics. A true smile is in the eyes, wide open posture indicates confidence and dominance, a greeting or handshake is an opportunity to quote-unquote gain the upper hand and make a good first impression. Eye contact is crucial and also conveys confidence. Micro-expressions and hotspots reveal an attempt to conceal an emotion, and politicians take extensive body language training ever since the so-called Great Debate between Kennedy and Nixon, in which Nixon won by a landslide when the radio audience was polled, but Kennedy won by a landslide with the TV audience because his body language was superior to Nixon's. The thing about body language is that it really does communicate emotion and intent, whether we like it or not. It's very difficult, for example, to assume a confident posture in a situation where one is feeling vulnerable, or to convincingly pretend that one is worried or sad. Body language experts can easily point out manufactured gestures and facial expressions, and so can most people intuitively. We know when a person is happy or sad, and it's undeniable that the behavior of others influences our own behavior. The alpha male walks naturally with confidence. His height means that others will be forced to look up at him. The thought never crosses his mind to bow his head or avert his gaze. He holds eye contact not because he's trying to send a signal, but because he simply isn't afraid to express his intent. The signal is received nonetheless. He shamelessly pursues women of interest, and his behavior is always goal-oriented. His mind and body remain calm and relaxed in response to stressful situations, and he's inclined to respond to aggression in kind. The alpha male exudes power, and everybody can tell by the way he carries himself. And this leads us into part 3.
As soon as you produce a value structure, you produce a hierarchy because people compete towards fulfilling they compete towards the end game, and that'll immediately produce a hierarchy of accomplishment, let's say. And then you might say, well, why would men be particularly motivated to do that? And the answer seems to be because of hypergamy, and hypergamy is the tendency of women to make across or up dominance hierarchies. So the males compete with one another, and they want to because they want to win, and part of the consequence of winning is that they have much more success with women, and that's a primary motivator.
I haven't spoken much about women because, well, this is a video about alpha males. Women have always had their own social hierarchies, and speaking purely in terms of evolutionary biology, they've always had different traits selected for than men. It's clear that throughout most of our history as a species, men would compete with each other while women would select men from the top portion of the hierarchy they're competing within. Whereas there would usually have only been a small number of hierarchies within which to compete for any given geographic location, there are now millions at our fingertips alone. It isn't the Stone Age anymore. And this is where it gets interesting for the modern alpha male, because the term really only describes any dominant male within any given social hierarchy. And there are so many new values and definitions of success which lead to new hierarchies and a staggering variety of potential strategies that his particular brand of being isn't always successful today. Just think about who might become captain of a chess team or get the lead role in a high school musical. I bet you're not picturing Chuck Norris. Bad example maybe, but you get my point. A man who could be described as an alpha based on all the conditions laid out in this video is likely to be successful today, but not guaranteed. Further, it's highly unlikely that he'll be successful within every hierarchy he enters. One thing is for sure though, he'll probably steal your beer and your girlfriend. And this is exactly where I think everything got mixed up. Pop culture and the self-help gurus have hijacked the term alpha male because it sounds cool and powerful. And it is. It sounds masculine and confident and assertive and like all the things that beta males naturally want to be. And it is all those things. But it's also got a definition. and that definition is the dominant male animal in a particular group, or a man tending to assume a dominant or domineering role in social or professional situations. When we refer to somebody as an alpha male in modern terms, what we're really talking about is a man who would have been likely to be the dominant male of his group in prehistoric times, and who still seems to be able to exert this influence today in career and social settings to achieve success. This isn't based on the books he's read or the cost of his hair gel, it's based on physical and psychological attributes which were simply a gift of nature, and nurture to some degree. If you want to be somebody who assumes the dominant role in some specific hierarchy, like a chess team for example, don't give me this bullshit about learning how to maintain eye contact and practicing yoga twice a week. Learn how to play fucking chess, really well, and never lose. Then you'll be confident when you meet with your squad and they'll all know you're the best, rather than simply appearing confident because you watched Aaron from Alpha M explain how to look like you are. But Aaron was right about one thing. The landscape is completely different now. While natural alphas are still likely to be able to use their gifted aptitudes and abilities to achieve financial and reproductive success, there's a whole lot more success going around, and you don't need to be an alpha male to get some. Plenty of women like men who are funny, smart, interesting, or talented in some unique way. And looking around at the men being produced by what's left of our culture in the West, your competition isn't too fierce. All you've got to do is be willing to put yourself out there to compete in something you're actually good at. Be truthful, adventurous, and dangerous in your own way as you seek out and confront chaos and turn it to order.
Something about you makes me feel like a dangerous woman. Something about
Hierarchical social structures. I think, well, there are different ways of climbing up a hierarchy. There are worse and better ways. The better ways allow you to live longer in a more stable hierarchy, and the evolutionary payoff for that is that you leave more descendants. And so the hierarchy itself becomes a very powerful shaping mechanism that determines how it is that people are going to adapt, because it's the primary method of selection. So there's an ethic in there. There's an ethic that emerges from the social interactions, but that's rapidly transformed into a biological selection device. And so we're selected. And that's especially true among human beings, because with chimps, the females are indiscriminate maters, which is to say that a female chimp in heat will mate with any male chimp. Now, the dominant males chase the subordinate males away, so they're still more likely to leave offspring than the subordinates, but it's not because of the females. But human females are different. Human females exert choice, and quite brutal choice, you might put it that way. They're very choosy, and it's one of the things that seems to have distinguished us from chimpanzees. And what roughly seems to happen is that the male dominance hierarchy elects men to the higher, say, rungs of the hierarchy, and then the females peel from the top. And so that means that what you can say is that human beings are the consequence of intense male dominance competition. It's not necessarily dominance, but it's competition for the upper rungs of the hierarchy, mediated by female selection.
something about